This video is a demonstration of a close reading of the poem Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden. So I'm going to give you guys a minute to take a look at the poem, and then we're going to go through the poem stanza by stanza and take a look at some of the diction choices and other elements of poetry that Hayden uses to get a message across, to get some sort of meaning across with this poem. Okay, so in the first stanza, the language to, Sundays too, my father got up early. The inference that we make there is that the father does this action every day. So every day he gets up early and starts the fire. In the next line, blew back cold, that indicates that this house doesn't have any heating, and that the early morning in this house, it's very, very cold, and that the father gets up and suffers that cold so that the boy doesn't have to. The next line, we see the language cracked and ached, and then following through in the fourth line there we see labor. So we get the inference there that the father does manual labor. And then finally, in the very last line, I didn't put it here under the noticing details, but no one ever thanked him. We might be making some sort of inference there that the speaker feels like that was a shameful behavior, or that was something that perhaps the rest of the family, no one ever saw the sacrifice that the father was doing for the family. Okay, in the next stanza, the second line there, when the rooms were warm, he'd call. So the inference we're making there is that the father is protecting the son, in this case protecting the son from the cold. So he waits until the rooms are warm before he calls the rest of the family to come and join in the main room. In the third line, we have the word slowly. And so here we have to kind of figure out what we think Hayden's getting at there. So why slowly would the boy why would the boy slowly rise and then get dressed? So is it avoidance? Is it dread? So you might have another idea here why the boy chooses to rise slowly. And then finally, we get the first part of tension in the poem here, fearing the chronic angers of that house. So the language, chronic angers, perhaps you're making an inference there, of course, that it's a habitual thing where there's constant anger. But it seems to be non-personalized. It doesn't say chronic angers of my father or anything like that. It says chronic angers of that house. Also the word that house. So not our house, but there's something going on with that house. And so let's just talk for a minute about how we can unpack that phrase. We could really think about the implications of the word that. We also can think about the implications of the word house. Why not home? And how would that change the poem if Hayden had chose different diction there for those last two words in that stanza? The fear, there's no inference there, so we know that there's fear. What is the fear about? Is the fear between the speaker and the father? Is the fear between the father and perhaps some other person in the house? Some people wonder if there's something going on in the house itself that is causing fear. So that's up for you to make a decision there, and then that, of course, would be your argument about what you think the poem is suggesting. Finally, we get to the third stanza. And that language in the first line, indifferently, we need to make an inference there about what's going on with this indifference. Does that indifference indicate kind of lack of love on the speaker's part, or kind of apathy? So what's the indifference? And so you're going to want to kind of think about what inference you're making from that. In the next line, we get this idea of protection again. So who had driven out the cold? So the father drives out the cold. So he doesn't just warm the rooms, but rather he seems to be chasing out this bad thing, the cold. And perhaps we get some sort of idea here now what indifference was indicating. So is he feeling remorse for his indifference? Is the speaker feeling remorse for his indifference? Also, I want to pay attention to these two verbs here, had driven, and then had would get included here, had polished. So those are both action verbs. So those idea that there's acts of love, right? We might be making an inference there about the actions of love. And then, of course, as well. So this idea that there are other actions of love that the Father takes. We get the repetition in the fourth line. So what did I know? What did I know? We might be making an inference there that there's some sort of exasperation or frustration with himself, that the speaker feels with himself. And then finally, that last line, and that's probably the part that we puzzle over the most. So of love's austere. So the austere, this idea of stern and somber love. So of love's austere and lonely offices. So offices is a very formal word, right? So he didn't say duties and obligations, but that's what we're left to kind of do as an inference there. So that maybe love here has some other duties and responsibilities. Maybe it's not always kind of warm and demonstrative, but maybe there are other ways to indicate love. So after we've gone through each one of the stanzas, then we have to make a decision. What argument do we think, or meaning or purpose? And I like to use the word argument to kind of get you guys to think that there are different interpretations, and you should be justifying your interpretation with the textual data that's at play. So once you've kind of read through the poem and noticed all these details that we were talking about in each one of these different stanzas, then it's time to make your own kind of argument about what you think the poem means. So I just kind of bulleted a few ideas here: that the speaker is remorseful of his behavior toward the Father, that perhaps something with maturity or hindsight, the speaker sees the relationship differently. Maybe with maturity, the speaker understands the many facets of love. Perhaps when I read this poem, I see that it's a love poem, an apology perhaps as well. So you want to make a decision of what, which, I know some of these things seem really similar, but you kind of want to circle down on maybe just one specific idea. And then we want to make sure we make some sort of statement about what we think that the poem means or argues. So if we were thinking about these ideas, these aren't strong enough as they are. We're going to have to revise them a little bit more. So I chose one of these ideas and revised it. So the original idea, with maturity or hindsight, the speaker sees his relationship differently. So we always want to take that idea and rephrase it out to a generalization. So notice I'm going to use the author's name here. So Hayden suggests that with maturity comes new appreciation for the many types of love. So I'm going to move it away from just the single instance with the speaker and his father and make it more into a generalization. Okay, that's it. So now it's time for you to make up your mind to what you think the poem is arguing. Okay, let me know if you have questions.